We're going to start. Thank you all for being here. My name is Natalia Brizuela, and I'm the director of the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, and I'm also a professor of Latin American literature and thought in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, and a professor of film in the Department of Film and Media. And I'm very, very excited to see a full room for this very exciting event. I'm really grateful to dear colleague Lydia Chávez for having connected us with Robert, who is journeying the country, showing some of this tremendous work that he did over the course of 4 years in El Salvador, and that he has recently put together in a beautiful book. There's a couple of books here that will be for sale at the end, and there is a copy of the book going around, so it might make your hands to tempt you to buy the book at the end. I wanted to thank the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies staff who's here for the support, and we're going to be recording the event so that people who are not here today can also watch it later. I also want to thank the Center for Human Rights for their co-sponsorship of this event. So today's event is really centered on Legacy of Lives, El Salvador, 1981-1984, but it's also an invitation to think about the ways in which that specific war has informed and been, in a way, a prologue for what is happening today in El Salvador under Bukele. There's a station right in the front row waiting for you.
Perfect. Yes. I won't need my glasses. Thank
you. So, Robert Nickelsberg worked as a contract photographer for Time for nearly 30 years, specializing in political and cultural change in developing countries. He's the author of Afghanistan, A Distant War, published in 2013, which represents his 25 years of work in Afghanistan. And his second book, Afghanistan's Heritage, Restoring Spirit and Stone, done in conjunction with the U.S. Department of State, was published in English, Dari, and Pashto in 2018. His most recent Legacy of Lives, El Salvador, 1981-1984, published in 2024, presents a collection of black and white images that Nickelsberg shot during the civil war in El Salvador for Time magazine, in which he just told me, it was right at the time that Time magazine moved to color. So what happened to all these black and white images? Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your work. And today's event is going to be moderated by Lydia Chávez, who's a Professor Emerita at the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism, where she taught for 29 years. She started as a reporter for the Albuquerque Tribune, later moving on to Time magazine, the LA Times, and the New York Times, where she served as El Salvador and South American bureau chief. Chávez holds a master's degree from Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism, along with a graduate diploma in art history, and a master's degree in art history from the Cortland Institute of Art in London. She's the founder and executive editor of Mission Local, a news site covering the Mission District that began at Berkeley in the fall of 2008 and became independent in the summer of 2014. No one better than Lydia to lead us into today's conversation. Thank you both.
Thank you. This is great. I'm not going to do much moderating because Bob has a lot of photos that I'm really anxious to have him take us through. But I thought it might be helpful to think about, past being prologue in two ways. First, of course, in the trajectory of El Salvador, the mass exodus of Salvadorians to the United States, the displacement and reception that led some to join gangs here, the subsequent recreation of an American-style gang culture in El Salvador that eventually begets someone like Bukele. Safety. People want to be safe in their place where they live. But it's also interesting to think about the past as prelude in the forming of a journalist. for Bob and for many of us in El Salvador, it was our first experience covering a war with heavy U.S. involvement. And what Bob experienced there would impact how he looked at subsequent assignments in conflict zones. He went on to cover, a lot that did not have American involvement, direct American involvement in Burma and Kashmir, but also those that with very direct government involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan. Each is different, but also similar. And the United States is in a foreign place. And no matter how many advisors or there were in El Salvador, or military in Iraq or Afghanistan, the U.S. is never in control. And that is something that is really hard to put your mind about it. But I was going back and reading a piece about Bukele in the New Yorker from 2022, and there's this quote from Bukele that kind of tells it all. It's, "Okay, boomers," he recently tweeted in English at members of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, "You have zero jurisdiction on a foreign, sovereign and independent nation. We are not your colony." And I think that just rings so true. I mean, no matter the amount of money spent or the men sent. So anyway, that's just something to think about as Bob goes through these photos.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Natalia, and the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies. And thank you for coming. There's a lot to look at here in 19 images. And thankfully, it's in black and white because the color images would obviously predominate around the color red. And here we don't really have to view that. So some background on the pictures I'm about to show. Where's the map? I had originally an interest in American foreign policy and how to illustrate it. When I was 18 in 1968, the Vietnam War was in full swing, and in that period of time, as an 18-year-old, we had to register for the draft for conscription, detention, and there was no way I was planning to go to Vietnam, nor did I want to. And at that time, though, the United States had 549,000 soldiers in Vietnam. So when in 1975, when that war ended, I started to freelance in photography as a photojournalist in New York City, and in 1979, I took a chance and went down to Costa Rica, where the Sandinistas had not yet moved towards Managua, and came across a reporter from the San Diego Union, who I maintained contact with, and with him, 2 years after that, I went into guerrilla territory in El Salvador through Honduras. Spent 2 weeks there. And after that trip, I spent 3 weeks with him crossing from Mexico into Guatemala with Guatemalan rebels. And that was one of the most sinister places I've ever worked. And I can say that with 30 years working in Afghanistan. El Salvador was more in front. Americans had a presence, and in 1981, I moved to San Salvador full-time for Time magazine. My housemate was the Time reporter, so we collaborated on stories and the visuals. Most reporters did not want to go out into a conflict zone with a photographer, but we shared at the end of the day where we had been and what we had seen, and I would ask him, what was I looking at? Can you explain to me, because I have to write the captions. And I would send film up to New York twice a week, maybe 3 times a week. I would never see the film. It was sent unprocessed. I would call up to the photo editor and ask, did the flash work? with the lens cap on. Did I have film in the camera? What was going on? They said, everything looks fine, don't worry about it, I have a meeting to go to, goodbye. So, not always, but I'd say more than half the time that was what I heard. Everything looks fine. And I have a colleague in the room who also went through that, he's laughing. But it's what we had to live with. Everything looks fine. So the black and white film sat in a box in my hallway in Brooklyn for about 20 years. It was unedited, it was not looked at. Because Time magazine at that time went to full color and the advertising went to color. So they didn't need black and white anymore, but I continued to shoot it. And what ended up happening is that I saw the 4 years that I spent there, starting in 2012, 2013. I saw my 4 years there differently. It was much more intimate. It was much more spontaneous. Color film, everything had to be metered, light metered. If you were a 16th of a stop off, they might not use it. So this you can play with once you scan it in or in the darkroom. And I found contextually and the continuity of narrative that I had been telling for 4 years in El Salvador to hold together. And there are 104 images in the book, obviously 16 3-ring notebooks full of just black and white film. And you see your pictures differently each time you edit. And this, given 20 years distance, I couldn't believe I took that picture. This I remember. Because with content like this, you have two members that are heading up the death squads in El Salvador. Nicolas Carranza, second one in on the left, and Lopez Nuila, the head of the National Police. Both of those departments in El Salvador had death squads. They were notorious. And later on, we found out that Carranza had been on the CIA payroll. $60,000 a year. And he had exile or asylum in Memphis, Tennessee. He came in as a janitor. But to see officers with a reputation that from those death squads was really quite something. And the fellow on the left, El Gorgo, was involved in the Mozote massacre as a captain. Here he is a colonel. And you'll see, I point this out, because I started to notice their rings from the military academy. It'll come up again. There's one on the fellow on the left, he's hiding it. But it's important to see these things as an observer, as a photographer, and as a writer too, to notice these things. They use that ring a lot to wave around as their symbol of power. The United States knew fully what these fellows were up to. And here's Carranza at the US Embassy talking to the US military attaché, a colonel in the Marine Corps. I kept very good relations with the embassy in order to get to photograph in events like this. And since I was living there, you don't want to burn bridges. You want to maintain an open door policy, and I'm still in contact with a press officer from that period today. But here you can see Carranza asking for something and the Marine colonel not really believing it. So these nuances that I wasn't aware of with the color film, I started to see more clearly in the black and white film. So, not to get stuck on this period of time completely for this talk, because we want to bring it up to contemporary times on how we got to Bukele and the migration issues, but my feeling is this period of time formed the foundation for why people fled north, violence. They participate. They try to join a union. They went to university. They would question. They would critique, and they were hammered for it. They really had no choice very often. Either join the guerrillas or flee. And it was people like this on the left, Carranza. You can see his Escuela Militar pin on his lapel. But the fact that a US Marine who'd probably been through Vietnam was not buying his line is significant here. So what people could do to get away from the Civil War was that they could go to the beach on the Pacific. And La Libertad is on the coast. San Salvador right here above it. It's about a 45-minute drive, and now it's probably 20 minutes. And you can imagine what's going on in their heads. There's gunfire every night in the capital and in the surrounding areas. But this was their one chance for a getaway on a Sunday. And the Salvadoran waves are known to surfers, but it is an interesting place to go and watch people. Less than a half a mile away is the morgue. And as journalists, it may sound absurd, but we always went to the morgue. That's half a mile away from the beach. The doors are open. You can go in. You didn't need any special permission. And this picture in color would not be as appealing to me as it is in black and white. But I stared at this for quite a number of minutes. The fellow on the left is just recognized as person in the lower right corner. And that's the moment that I captured. But you had to do it in a way that would be acceptable to be published. And now, if I concentrated on that figure, I doubt it would have gotten any recognition from an editor. It's too gory, too descriptive, so you minimize, but it's about the people and their response to the violence. And if a person didn't come home at night, the following day, you didn't go to the police. You went to the Human Rights Commission to register a missing person, or you went to the morgue. Seriously, you did not want to go to the police. But this particular study, the physiognomy of this, the roundness of the features, and this looks like a younger brother to me. A lot of visits to morgues. And as a photographer, you learn how to photograph a dead body appropriately, with dignity. Don't get in the way of the people. At the time, there were 55 US advisors in El Salvador, training a new battalion in the countryside. They're special forces from Vietnam. They came out of Panama. Everything about the uniform on the officer on the left triggers something for me is a uniform I did not want to be wearing when I was 18 years old. That's straight out of Vietnam. The boots, the cargo pants, the blouse, the cigarette, the notepad. So the rules were no faces, no names, no rank, nothing to identify them. So you had to learn how to take pictures from behind. Yes, I took pictures from the front. We couldn't publish them. Everything in this picture, supply-wise, material-wise, was paid for by the United States. The guns, the uniforms, the hats, the boots, everything. US aid. And at that period of time, we were very doubtful of anything coming out of the State Department or the embassy about progress being made in El Salvador. Doubtful, critical, questioning, curious. Most embassy people, as smart as they were and as friendly as they might be once you go into the building, did not leave the building. They didn't go to the field. A few did, not many. That's often the case for any embassy diplomat in a conflict zone. This particular officer, Sigfredo Ochoa, and here's the ring again, speaking the hearts and minds program that they tried to smother Vietnam with, strategic hamlets. Please don't go to the hills. We will take care of you. We will fix your roads. We will fix your houses. We will give you food and employment. Safety and security is with us. What many people didn't know at the time was that he was responsible for killing 135 civilians in a village nearby. Everything that he has here, a watch is a US military watch. That's a military flashlight, the backpack, the hat, the uniform, and the bullhorn, supplied by the United States. The faces on the crowd, you could pretty much count on 50% of their children in that crowd are up in the mountains with the guerrillas. Behind him is another American advisor. What I was concerned about was the weapon. It's an Israeli Galil. The only forces that used Galils in Central America were the Guatemalan army. But the arrogance of this fellow to have a special weapon concerned me. And again, I had to stand behind him in order to get a picture. But when I went behind him and saw the weapon, I was tempted to slug him, but not a good idea. You know, the anger and the anxiety and the emotion you have walking in, you have about 10 seconds to take this before you have to move. But it stuck with me. And with Natalia, we were talking about the knowledge of weapons and how I wanted to make sure that the reporters I worked with knew what they were looking at. It's important. It's at least a paragraph for you. This fellow, Colonel Domingo Monterosa, and notice the ring on the left hand, also from the Escuela Militar, the equivalent of West Point. John Lee Anderson, one of the writers in the book, and I had spent 2 days with him. This is, sorry, I want to show you where it was taken, because it's up near where Mozote massacre. I want to show you on the map. I can't quite get it. It's way up in the northwest of the country, near where Mozote happened. He was the battalion commander, and over 1,000 civilians were massacred with a US trained battalion. And one of the things that's interesting in this picture is not just Domingo, it's the soccer ball. And the psychological warfare that was conducted in Central America, in each country, was, they were trained in this at School of the Americas in Panama. And who trained them about PSYOPs from Vietnam with the Taiwanese military? One of the instruments in PSYOPs to sweeten their presence in a village give the kids soccer balls. That didn't come from a Salvadoran custom or tradition. It came from PSYOPs. I had heard about this from Guatemala, and I couldn't believe that it's there. There's evidence. Now, how do you photograph psychological warfare? How do you illustrate it? This is the way. So at about 4 in the afternoon, a captain comes up to Monterosa and says, whispers in his ear, but we found out that later on, that he had to leave. They found something of the rebels in another village that he had to fly out. He apologized. So he jumped on a helicopter, which was full, and left, and we wanted to spend another day with him, the reporter and I. And he said, no problem, just drive out tomorrow, and we'll make sure that we meet up. So that afternoon, they found the radio transmitter of Radio Venceremos, the rebel radio station that moved constantly, would broadcast the news and move to a cave, to some hidden place in the forest, and they were desperate to capture that transmitter. The transmitter is no bigger than a VCR machine or a stereo amplifier, not very big. So the following day, they put it onto the helicopter. The helicopter got about 500 feet up into the sky, and it blew up. It was packed with C4 explosive. So they tricked them. But the guerrilla group that controlled this part of the country also controlled Mozote. And out of revenge, they wanted him. And luckily, we were not on that helicopter the day before. It was over capacity. But I tried to have a helicopter ride a week. I felt neglected if I didn't have one. But there was good luck in it being over capacity. So we never made it out to see him. But it turns out he was also involved in the killing of the nuns, the 3 missionaries and the 1 lay worker. He was head of the airport security that the nuns flew in on and sent out word that they've arrived. This just came out in a George Black article in the New Republic a few years ago. And he was also on the CIA payroll. I was on a first-name basis with him. I could go to the garrison where he controlled his battalion and just crash in on them and find out where they were going next week or in 2 weeks to embed with them. It was that kind of a relationship that you wanted to build up with the military. At the same time, he knew what we were after about Mozote. And John Lee said he had just started to ask Monterosa about his involvement in Mozote massacre when he just left that afternoon. So being there full time has its advantages. In March of 1982, 4 Dutch journalists from a television station in Amsterdam who had covered the Sandinista revolution showed up for elections in El Salvador. They were not welcomed by the security forces. We all were in one hotel, Hotel Alameda, owned by the right-wing oligarch. Forget his name. Your rooms were bugged, your phones were tapped. You didn't talk about what you were doing to anyone in the staff. So they had a meeting with the guerrillas to cover the presidential campaign. They went out to Chalatenango, a 2-hour drive. They were stopped at a roadblock, taken out, taken up into the forest, shot, and the next day they came back in a casket. So this is what can happen if you're not careful, if you're not smart. They were picked up a week before by another police operation because one of the guerrillas that they had captured and killed, they found a business card of the main broadcaster in the shirt pocket of the guerrilla. So they were taken in and questioned. For me, that would have been a signal, forget it. But they continued on. And they were followed for an hour before they were pulled over. They should have, well, a lot of things they should have done. But there's also a way to photograph dead body again. And in color, I'm not sure if this would have been an appropriate picture. I'm in touch with one of the brothers of one of the four, who's 80 years old, who's fighting the case because the officer, a captain in the Salvadoran army who stopped them in the countryside, is now living in Virginia. And they're trying to get him out of the country, and that he became a colonel. He's 90. He's fighting it. He doesn't want to be sent back to El Salvador. But I saw the brother a year ago, November, in Amsterdam. An interesting conversation. So every morning, I would get up early, find out if a village had been attacked. We'll eventually get to 2026 in El Salvador, but the past, again, this is what myself, colleagues, Matthew Nathans, others in the press corps would do every morning, is find out where an attack had been the night before and try to get there early. Leave at 6 in the morning. Go down the Pan American Highway and find the road in to this village. This was a militia unit that had positioned itself behind a rock wall at the corner of the village. And if you look in the upper left, you can see where an RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade, had been fired. And this is the exact happening, killing these 3 militiamen. Most likely at 2 in the morning. What did the guerrillas want? The weapons. So before 8 o'clock, this is one of the guerrillas, still in town. By 8 o'clock, the military would come in, and we left soon after taking this picture. But up the street, about 50 feet, I could hear crying. Walking up in a doorway, this woman on the ground had just fainted, learning that one of these 3 was her brother. But you can see the effect on the family. Everyone's related. Just look at the facial features. You don't have to be a forensic anthropologist to figure this out. This is a combined family. But who does it affect the most? It's the little kids. Now this was considered a right-wing conservative village, pro-government, not pro-leftist. So you don't know what they did, but this is the age group that very often civilians would take north. And they're the ones who grew up in LA, Houston, San Francisco, and became part of the gangs. Anyway, this is the way you follow a story as a photographer. Early, quick, observe, be kind, be polite, leave. I didn't want to be there with the army coming in. So, I've often asked, does anybody recognize the vehicle in this picture? Does anybody know what type of car it is?
Lincoln, armored Cadillac.
Thank you, Matthew. This can only be the embassy vehicle that the ambassador usually travels in. 10,000 pounds. showing up at the military air base at Ilopango to pick up a State Department or a White House representative. We were invited to come. But here, this is a symbol for me of the United States foreign policy. That's a security man on the right and a follow vehicle on the left. US plane here, and very often a VIP would show up. I don't know if anybody recognizes Gene Kirkpatrick. This is Ambassador Dean Hinton, a Graham Greene kind of character. This is security and her staff at the Salvadoran Foreign Ministry, welcoming Gene Kirkpatrick to El Salvador. There's only one Salvadoran in the picture. You can see how the Americans just take over. She was hardcore conservative. Her best friend was William Casey, head of the CIA. You can imagine what they talked about that period of time. So from here, we go to here. I found out a number of years later that she came down to El Salvador to essentially fire Dean Hinton because he wasn't bloodthirsty enough. She wanted more dead communists. So they moved him to Pakistan to take care of the Mujahideen. He was an amazing poker player. He'd fleece everybody in the staff. They were furious with him. He was from Montana, smoked a lot of cigars, and was a great raconteur. I mean, he was an interesting character, but he wasn't bloodthirsty enough. Another person that came down was Henry Kissinger. These were congressional delegations. You would wait 2 hours as a photographer just to take something like this, but Kissinger, again, is a legacy from Vietnam, and one of the close advisors of Ronald Reagan, who was president at the time. So in this picture, because I needed to take good captions, on the left is Senator Jack Kemp, a former Buffalo Bills football player. This is Lane Kirkland from the AFL-CIO, the union. Jim Wright to the left of Alvaro Magana from Texas. I'm not sure the fellow between Kemp and Jim Wright, but the only Salvadoran in the picture is Alvaro Magana. He's telling at a press conference to the Salvadoran public and to the military and the government, please improve your human rights record and the military and economic aid will flow. Because it was voted on every 6 months in Congress, particularly the military aid. So being the person in the field, I had to follow all this and be prepared with pictures in advance for Time Magazine, being a weekly, in case they wanted to run or publish a picture from the country, not just a headshot from the State Department or the Defense Department or the President. So we became the counter-narrative media. Again, going to parades, festivities, at a graduation ceremony for the military academy, you'd often see oddities like this, drum majorettes. Salvadorans, daily life, not with the guerrillas. I mentioned before about if somebody did not show up in the morning, what did the ladies do? They went down to the Salvadoran Human Rights Commission and registered their case. We needed to be there at 8:30 in the morning because by 10 o'clock this line didn't exist. Most people had to go back to work. But you can see what the people may have done for their domestic life. The two ladies in front wearing aprons had come from a house. The woman behind was about to go to the market or had already done so. And the woman here is most likely working in an office. Look at their shoes, look at their hair, look at their clothing. you should be able to tell and describe who they are, what strata they came from. They did not go to the police department. Whether anything was done here, I doubt it. But it was one outlet for them to seek some justice. This is a village off the Pan American Highway that the Newsweek photographer and I decided we hadn't been there in a while, let's go see what's happening. Out of the blue, we show up, the guerrillas are in town, but look at their clothing, look at their hats, look at their belts, the Che Guevara look. And one thing I didn't notice until a few years after I had scanned this picture in was the notebook on the fellow on the left in his belt. It's like a composition book. And it told me that he's literate. I didn't ask him. Very significant of Salvador, the leather cowboy hats. This being the cover of the book. We had to crop. Can't have a naked child in the cover. But it tells you one thing, poverty. And they're getting information. We had TV taped all over our car, on the sides, on the windscreen, on the hood, on the trunk, to let them know we were coming up the road. Obviously in a rental car, it wasn't a military vehicle, but we had to introduce ourselves. This is the Atlacatl Battalion crossing a river in San Miguel province. Again, part of their training was to walk 10 feet apart, single file, don't bunch up. And here you see just the opposite. Everything that they're wearing, paid for by the United States. This was the premier battalion, the first trained American battalion. And the mountains in the background are where the guerrillas were most likely waiting for them. They rarely engaged this battalion. This is the last picture. There was a road about an hour outside of San Salvador that led to a lake up in the midpoint here, about 5 miles away. Deserted, no farmers, and very often we had nothing, I say nothing better to do. Let's go up to the Suchitoto Road, see what we find with the Newsweek photographer. You never knew what you'd find. We didn't have cell phones. We had no way of knowing what was going on up here. We did not hear about this ambush. This is an ambush of the Salvadoran army. These are guerrillas that were bringing food back up to the volcano on the other side of that tree on the horizon line. They themselves are curious. It was dead silent. They were looking at the soldiers that had been killed the night before. Everything taken, the boots, the uniforms, the shirts, and the weapons. They didn't care about the truck. They didn't need it. But you can see here, look closely, Army shirt, Army boots, M16s, very often sold out of the back of a garrison, whereas the United States government would say no, they came in from Cuba. There was big money for a colonel in a battalion at a garrison to make money selling things out the back door. So the boots have been taken, uniforms gone. There's a dead person up there in the bush. It's actually an interesting, it's almost part of a video. Natalia, this, I can find it. We used it spread out like 4 dead silence while we were looking at this. Really incredible. But there was a helicopter flying around looking for us. So we didn't stay long. Everyday life as a photographer in El Salvador. How we get to 2026 from this, I think we want to open it up for questions and discussion and hear your thoughts. Not keep this totally for journalism, which has obviously changed, but foreign policy now does not get the scrutiny that we were able to give it in this period of time. And the United States has lost a lot of the moral integrity that it had gained from World War II, from the Vietnam War, which they claimed to have been a success, which was not. So as journalists, remain curious and question authority. Question it. And if you're accurate, you're effective. We no longer have accuracy in all of the media today. It's polarized. I don't recognize some of the mediums that are used, but you now have choice. Back then, this picture, it took a week before, from when I took it to when it could be published. But foreign policy, to me, is still intriguing. This is what drove me to set up and live in El Salvador, which I did. I lived for 11 years in India and covered all of South Asia. It's the only way you can do it properly. And question authority. So, we're gonna open.
Yeah, let's open it up to comments. It's great.
We have a lot of time, I think.
Questions,
Yeah.
comments?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for the wonderful storytelling. I just am wondering, the life that you lived 30 years ago, 40 years ago, how much of that were you aware of the imminent danger that you were, being in war, being among constant, and how did you rectify that? How did you push yourself to still sort of be in that situation and do your best?
You try to learn from each experience from the day before or the week before, how to keep yourself secure. And just be observant 100% of the time.
I think you're driven by curiosity too. You want to see for yourself. You really, when you're in a foreign place like El Salvador, and you see what is happening in Washington and people coming from Washington, you just know that there's this huge gap between what you see and what is being said. So the drive is wanting to see more.
Within 45 minutes of the Capitol,
Yeah.
you can prove somebody in a position of authority wrong. Things are not improving. These weapons are not coming from Cuba. Yes, some did. Why wouldn't the Cubans throw some money in this direction? It's the way things are done. It's the way the game's played. But the window's open, you go in before it closes. Now, this was the base. I could go down to this base any morning and get on a helicopter and go out and see what was going on. But I realized that if I did this enough, I'd probably end up dead. But these pictures, any one of these you could be attacked and hit a landmine. I mean, you just keep going, trying to stay ahead, but with the right person in the car. And nobody else. Sorry, the back seat's full. No. And you had to be that way. and work with a collaborator. And I worked with the competition. The Newsweek photographer was my best friend.
Who was he, Bob? Who was the newsroom photographer?
John Hoagland.
Who was he?
Who was killed.
Killed
Yeah.
on this
They
road,
were out
on the
that-
Suchitoto Road. We were machine gunned. And they knew who we were.
Yeah.
Hi, I was an undergrad here. I was part of a group called CECOT, Students Against Intervention in Central America. And we're more working to support the Zapatistas at that time. But one of my colleagues, I ran into her in the library, and she was doing research on pictures about the conflict. And she showed all the major magazines, and basically in every magazine when there's a gun, someone firing, it was always one of a guerrilla, right, firing at a funeral or such. And she said there was really almost no pictures that were sympathetic to the FMLN, right? And so, and I'm wondering, did you see this kind of bias? Is this like self-censorship in a way, like, and is it still going on, like, among the major news outlets?
I mean, you know, it was actually much easier to go out. I think you saw everything. I don't, you know, remember exactly what was printed, but you saw both sides, and you went out with both sides.
Yeah, she said, like, after all the pictures she's looked at, about 80% were
Interesting.
when there were guns being fired, like when there was violence, it was that of guerrillas, right, attacking. That's
Like the ones that actually got chosen to be
Yeah,
printed,
yeah,
like a discussion
yeah,
between what gets taken.
Well, what were the publications? You'd have to find
I
out.
think she was looking at Time and Newsweek and all of those. I don't know. She was just showing it to me in the library, but it was the major
I mean, if
magazine.
you knew anything about Time magazine back then, it was conservative. It was not pro-guerrilla. I mean, I had to argue with the world editor every time I went to New York. At lunch, George, what are you talking about? Let it happen. Stop being this way. Don't be a redneck. You know, I mean, just open it up. I'm showing you what goes on down there. Ah, no, they're all got to get rid of the communists.
Would you say it's still like
I
that?
ended up at Fox News.
Oh, makes sense. Would you say
When he
it's,
was employed.
would you say it's still like that to a degree, or
No.
No.
And the picture editors are the ones who are the traffic police for that. I mean, word on the desk, everything is filtered before it's printed. So I find the number you're using, 70 to 80%, a bit off, unless it was a solidarity publication for a solidarity movement.
Well, no, I meant 80% of the pictures she saw was kind of negative towards the guerrillas.
Negative.
Yes, like they were, when there was violence, like pictures of violence or people with guns, it was mostly pictures of the guerrillas, not of the army and such. So it was.
There's another question.
Yeah, two journalistic type question. So you were there many years, you were taking pictures every day. How often did they print one of your pictures?
Not very often.
Once a week?
That'd be good. I was paid.
Okay, and then you also mentioned, this might be
Real
obvious.
estate in journalism is valuable, you know.
Okay.
The Pope could be shot, as it did happen, or Reagan was shot. You lose those pages that were delegated to you from Saturday to the following Monday. They just have to take it to do a bigger report. So the 2 pages for El Salvador that had been designated from a story conference were lost. They took it. So where does that work go? For me, it went into the archive to be used again. But you had to accept it.
The other question, which might be obvious, but I can interpret it different ways, you mentioned that journalists didn't want to be photographers. Why?
No, I mean, we work together.
I thought you said that.
I mean,
What?
generally-
You said, I believe you said that journalists often did not want to be with photographers.
Well, not all people wanted to go out looking for the confrontation.
I see. You meant that they didn't want to go out there.
Also, at a daily newspaper, I was with the New York Times for the last 2 years that Bob was there. It was insatiable. The desks just wanted more and more and more. So it was so, I mean, what you learn when you're in an environment where there's US involvement, like, they want you in the paper almost every day. And it's so easy to get into the paper, whereas when you're in a place where there's not US involvement, it's very difficult.
But also, we would get stuck.
Yeah.
They had to get back and get on the telex machine. And there was a danger from the actual event that we were chasing and not being able to file. I would go to the airport and put my film on cargo and ship it up to Miami to New York.
And the other thing is photographers get much closer. The quest for the best photo and the sharpest photo of the conflict is to get closer and closer. And as a print journalist, you don't need to be right in front of what's, you can keep your distance.
Radio people want their microphone as close as possible to get the ambient sound. Good radio people.
Can I ask a question, then with you, then over there? Thank you so much for this presentation. I was kind of fascinated by when you talked and showed some images where we saw some of the 55 U.S. advisors. I also love that term for what they're doing. It's advising on better killing tactics or something. But the fact that there were no faces, no names, no rank of those people, right? Those people that are, if I understood correctly, the ones exercising the education of the killing machine that is U.S. foreign policy. And I couldn't but help think about, kind of jump ahead and think that one of the most, for me, forceful and violent images of our present day witch hunt against people that are not U.S. born in this country, right, through the ICE patrol agents, like, they cover their faces so that we do not know their faces, their names, their ranks. And in the middle, right, like the way we all became acquainted and began knowing about Bukele's prison, there's something that kind of ties these things together, which is like all the prison, what do you call them? Prison security guards? Yeah, the security guards, they're all masked so that we do not know, right? And so then one thinks, okay, so photojournalism is also about showing, right? And in a way, it seems like from here to today, one is always not being able to show precisely what one needs to see. So it's an invitation for reflection on that kind of inherent contradiction. You told us, you go back to Washington or New York and sit down with your editor and be like, dude, you gotta publish some of these other images because the story is a different one. And in fact, the actual story is also about those no faces, no names, no ranks that in our current day and happening through Bukele, we can never show. We can never fully see, because that would just be too much evidence.
Facial recognition can see through the balaclava.
Yeah.
So good luck, if
Yeah.
they really want to hide.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's a good point.
But the gesture, you see what I mean?
But
Just like-
here, this is the front of an advisor, and he contacted me in 2019.
Oh, so you knew-
I got an email. Because in 1983, I published Time published a picture of him training from the back.
From the back.
And he said, in color, it was printed in color, he said, my parents kept this issue of Time magazine for me, and now I'm wondering if you have any more of me.
Oh, he's making himself a star.
So he found, through Google, he found me, he found my website, or whatever, and so I sent him these of him full, he was like 26. He didn't go to, he was one of the few that was not in Vietnam. But what I managed to get out of him were the names of other advisors who he had served with, who were special forces in Vietnam. And I have a few of them in the book. Because that rule, once the war was over, they're not going to come knocking at my door for printing nowadays. It was acceptable. But we respected that demand in order to continue to gain access. Well, we wanted access. The writers needed background from people, not to feel that they wouldn't get in trouble by being quoted, not by name, but just a quote, some knowledge. And you had to protect your sources. And Lydia got a lot closer to the advisors than I could, because I have a camera, so, and I'm not taking notes for that, but not many advisors wanted to speak to reporters.
But it's an interesting point about places and right now what we're experiencing with ICE and
Border Patrol.
I mean, what would have happened if we, use the names, and I guess we just would have been cut off.
Some magazines
Yeah.
did publish
Yeah.
faces. Gene Richards, photographer, had advisors full face in a contemporary publication. I don't know, they didn't care. Just-
Yeah, I lived and worked in Nicaragua from 1984 to 88 up in Esteli. And I knew Susan Meiselas, who of course took a lot of photographs during the Nicaraguan Revolution. And one of her interesting projects was to go back and find some of the people that she had talked to. And I wondered if you ever had an occasion to go back and find the guerrillas or the other residents.
I did in Guatemala. I went back in 2019. But I have no interest, to be quite honest, to go back to Salvador. But Guatemala, very intriguing, very mysterious. And I took portraits on a tripod with a medium format camera way up in Quiche in the mountains. And you could not ask people their names. They'd be freaked. They were all wearing the huipiles, the traditional native dresses and blouses. And I found through forensic anthropology, did Eric leave? Yeah, Eric left. Clyde Snow was a very well-known anthropologist, a forensic anthropologist who found grave sites and then through DNA found relatives and whatnot. So they put me in touch with a forensic anthropologist who spoke Maya Ishil language. And I found 8 of 14 people who were kids then or adults. And they all had PTS, major. And quite moving. They were freaked to see me holding their picture from 1984. What spaceship did you come in on? Where did this come from? Because if they were caught with a scrapbook, and there were suspects or potential militants in the picture, they were killed.
Right, I was in Neiva in
Neiva,
84.
that's the town where I went.
Right. Big 50 caliber machine guns
You
in the
know
entrance.
that boy. I get goosebumps just thinking about it.
Sinister place is a good description.
Really. One of the scariest.
I think we're here, and here, and then
First of all, thank you for telling the story. I'm sure what happened in El Salvador had a big effect on many people. For me personally, 10 years after we were shooting photos in '81, I was going to many of the same places. I was in San Agustin actually, and that's the one village where I kept in touch with people. I was on a solidarity trip. And the idea that I'm wondering about is that if the truth will just get out, things might change, or if people could only know. And I think for me, I was an undergrad at the time, the feeling was with solidarity, if people could just know the reality of what's going on there, then maybe we can oppose this. And maybe we can, stop this terrible U.S. support for this tragic these tragic atrocities. And so the truth getting out seemed to make a huge difference. And I'm just thinking about today, two things come to mind. The truth does get out now in so many ways, and who's telling the story, right? You had the means to get film to editors or the means to publish and distribute. Nowadays, often the storytellers are first-person affected populations right there in the middle of the conflict, filming what's going on in their own home. And I'm just left wondering, for me as a 20-year-old at that time, it felt like we could really make an impact if we just had the truth out. And older now, it feels like it's a more complex world. It's less, sometimes it seems less black and white, who's right, who's wrong, and what can be done. And I'm just wondering, what do you see with conflicts today? Is there still that feeling that if the truth will get out? Or is it a different world where now the truth really is out in lots of formats and it's being manipulated and managed?
I think the latter is the case. And there are many more choices for people to seek out information rather than be fact-checked, which was a big part of the institutions that Lydia and I worked for. It had to be accurate, or it went into the opinion section. Now the front page appears on some publications that could be from an opinion page. The British have a different tradition in journalism. They weave in and out satire and gossip, and not everywhere, but that's permitted. But the Dutch in particular were very much on the left side of things during these periods of conflict. Heavy. And there's a lot of sadness of the editors of those four, I showed you one of, that they felt they may have pushed them too far to cover the left constantly. All the coffee that is had in Rotterdam, Amsterdam, from Salvador, Guatemala, and these were countries that the rebel movements were strong in, and that was part of the solidarity on the receiving side. But as trained journalists, you try to be as all-encompassing as possible. Fact check yourself, not self-censor. It's too much heart, not enough here. And we're like that when we're 20. Or 40. Or 60.
From what you saw in El Salvador many years ago, when the violence in El Salvador changed from political movement to urban Mara Salvatrucha warfare, could you understand the support that people give Bukele? I'm not saying that he's not a horrible human being. I'm just trying to put myself in the shoes of those that are faced with tremendous violence. And I'm from Mexico, and I've seen towns in Mexico where drug dealers really take control of everybody's lives, and they would like a little bit of security from the state, not Bukele style. But I'm just wondering, what's your impression now of what's going on in El Salvador?
I'm going to speak about a young woman that I came across at Lydia's house, Salvadoran, who, her parents came north.
Yeah.
Her parents came north, and they tried to go back once a year. They were from a town outside of San Salvador, but because of the gang violence, they couldn't visit any other relative.
No.
They couldn't. And then they'd come back to the States, frustrated, angry. And this was the same if you lived in downtown San Salvador. Every block was part of a gang's territory. But now they can go back and they can visit their aunt, or they can visit their cousin across town. They can celebrate somebody's birthday. Yet the 40,000, or how many there are in the jail, CECOT, have no chance of seeing a lawyer.
No.
But So they're living with these contradictions. But there's peace. This is a country peculiarly resistant to any type of heroic interpretation of their country. There are no heroes in there. No Don Quixote. There's nobody coming in with on the horse to save them. And it's very frustrating for them. But now they can go and visit people. And they can take a bus. And they're not paying a bribe to continue on. And Costa Rica is considering Bukele's prison plan as a franchise, you know, in a way, because Costa Rica is facing a rising crime rate.
Right.
I mean, Mexico should be, you know, no, I won't forget. But this is a phenomenon that he is, as a right-wing populist, he's successful that way. Well, what's your definition of success? So, it's a quandary, unanswered.
Correct.
But this girl gave the prime example. We can now go down and we can see our family.
She will vote for Bukele, I assume, if she had a chance.
I think she probably would. I mean, yeah.
They're short term, they're not.
Yeah,
thinking
they're
long
not
term.
linking, yeah.
Sorry, first there's a question over here.
So my question is in regards to the picture that you showed us of the girl that fainted.
Of the,
The girl that fainted.
Yes.
She found out her brother had died. You mentioned that that these are the people that then come to the United States, LA, Texas, and then you also mentioned that something about like gangs, like they're typically the people that are a part of gangs here in the United States. Like, could you like recap a little bit more about that and like where you heard that information, or did you get that opinion? Because I mean, most of the time these people don't migrate over here to do that, start gangs or.
I worked a lot with the LAPD
Mhm.
in gang
And most of them
neighborhoods,
were
a lot. And an 18-year-old Salvadoran or Nicaraguan or Guatemalan, there's a very good chance he was
Working.
exposed to that violence and taken by their parents to come north. And as they grew up, they'd have to walk to school, and they would be stopped by the Mexican gangs in control. They formed their own gangs. They were collaborating with MA, and they had their own. Now, you don't know which people in these pictures did that, but I'm just saying this was an example of a family that was exposed to a lot of violence. It could very well have said, look, we're out of here. This is too much. And come north. And 98% of Salvadorans that came north were not given asylum. There was a firm government commitment not to do that. Jonathan Blitzer wrote a good book about that period of time, about people coming north, and I think if you got it, it would answer a lot of your questions. I mean, we have a lot of territory to go through here, you know, in this, and I did not ask them their names or ages in this picture, but it's pretty evident what's going on here in that image that I told you about.
Well, what's the possibility of them, you know, getting an education or, you know,
Correct.
having a good life?
Well, could they have gotten an education by staying?
Probably.
We don't know. I mean, the teachers were often not paid. And they were targets, picked up, or threatened. It's a complicated situation, but it's a good question. I haven't been able to answer it fully.
Bob, in the period between your covering it and then the rise of the gangs, the question in my mind is, what happened to the militants? What happened to the militants? As the gangs began to take over, what happened to the rebels? what happened to the army? Where did they go?
Well, the FMLN became part of the government, and they were kicked out. And somebody else came, right wing came in,
Right?
FMLN came back in. I mean, some of them went mainstream. They came out of the mountains.
And they
Well, came
inherited,
back to the
and
country.
they inherited the problems of theirs.
A lot of compromises have to be made. I mean, Bukele, the interesting thing about Bukele is drugs are still being moved through that country. The guys who got caught using it and selling it are in jail.
Exactly.
But the guys that were moving it are still active.
Or got pardoned.
Not, well,
Not El Salvador.
pardon is given
Not El
differently there.
Salvador.
It's called a pass, I think.
Yes.
Yeah,
This was our last question, yeah.
this is kind of a personal question, you don't answer, How many, during your time there, how many times did you wonder, what the heck am I doing here? Or did you just feel like you were in the place you wanted to be, you wanted to be?
Yes. You have to maintain, I mean, it's not just endurance, and I got to understand the story better and better and better. Remember, my housemate was a reporter for Time magazine. We went through this constant, these discussions. What did that mean? What did the priest say? What did that librarian say? You know, so I needed information to take a more informed picture. But I could not stay more than 100 days before I needed to get out. Every single day. I mean, I might have taken a half day off and gone to the beach, but you go to the morgue when you go to the beach. Pretty sick. I mean, it's crazy, but you're constantly on. It's 24/7, and it's analog. Pebble by pebble. I learned how to change car tires a lot on the Pan American Highway. It wasn't just picture taking. It was keeping my sanity and finding Chilean wine occasionally. It was important. Country Toro. Most of it turned to vinegar, but you try to balance it the best you can. But being informed sort of helped with your stability, because curiosity is important, but don't fully embrace it, because then your curiosity goes away. You have to remain up to a point. Sentiment, same way. Don't fully embrace sentiment. Approach it from many different ways. Understand your own sentiments. But it's for the common people in a daily life that we were witnessing. We had a housekeeper that came 3 times a week. She took 2 buses to get to us. We would ask her, what did you see on your way to the different buses? Did you see any bodies? Because that's where the death squads would drop the bodies near bus stops. So the people in the slums, this is what can happen to you if you join the guerrillas. Purposely dropped in these locations. And we'd get that information, race down there. Of course, the funeral parlors take the bodies because that's their business. It's crazy. So we go to the funeral home to find out who that person was they picked up. Natural causes or bullet? I mean, the story is about what we found, and I don't have pictures of. It is insane. A pickup truck full of dead bodies stuck on a hill. We couldn't figure out why we couldn't get around, so I walked up and I go, you gotta be kidding me. There's a pickup truck completely full of corpses from a torture center. And one started to move. We were the counter narrative to what was coming out of the State Department, and I had to hold my ground and be accurate and have colleagues that I could ask what I was seeing, is it true? Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.